Hello my beautiful friends. Today I am so excited to be sharing 16 thrillers that feature serial killers. These are ones that I personally really enjoyed. I thought they had some great twists and turns, some great moments, and I'm gonna go through and give you a quick synopsis of each book and what kind of stood out to me about it. So let's go ahead and hop in. So the book that kind of inspired this video and that I won't stop talking about, I read it last year. It is still one of my favorite books I think I've ever read, one of my favorite thrillers ever, and that is The Trap by Katherine Howard. When I tell you, the ending of this is forever cemented in my brain, despite being someone who reads a lot of books, specifically mysteries and thrillers. This book stands out among them. I was gobsmacked, truly. I mean, that is the only word I think that really sums up my feelings about this book here. So this one takes place in Ireland. There are 3 points of view you're following, and the main one is Lucy's sister, Nikki. So Nikki, about a year ago, left the pub after hanging out with friends in Dublin, and she walked home, never to be seen again. Now Lucy, we're reading from her perspective, and she is trying to figure out what happened to Nikki, and how she's doing that is very dangerous. She's basically hitchhiking with whoever will pick her up on the side of the road, kind of where her sister was picked up, and hoping to come across her sister's killer, because there was a series of women in that same area who were never seen again, and there's presumed to be a serial killer on the loose. Then we have Angela, who is a civilian, like, pencil pusher who's working at the Garda, the police force there, and she kind of gets involved in the case, which you really kind of root for her, and I like that. And she starts to really get involved with these 3 Irish women that are missing. She starts to kind of pull at the thread. She started to try to put it together. She really wants to be a full-fledged member of the Garda. Then you're reading from an unnamed man during this, who is very chilling. And I'm just going to read exactly how it's said because I don't think I can summarize this better. It says, a nameless man drives through the night, his latest victim in the back seat. He's going to tell her everything from the beginning, and soon she'll realize what you don't know can hurt you. I love this. I also recommend The Nothing Man from Katherine Howard. That book was, I mean, this is my very favorite, but they were both exceptional thrillers in my opinion. Now, Eve was the only one who survived this man named the Nothing Man. He is a serial killer. He killed multiple families, and she's the only survivor. She was a young girl at the time. She survived, and years later she's writing a true crime memoir about him. Then you're also reading the supermarket security guard Jim's perspective as he starts to read her memoir. Oh, this book, several moments I was truly shocked. A fantastic book. I love it. I gotta check out more by this author. Next we have Angel Fire by Lisa Unger. This is actually part of her Lydia Strong mystery series. I've only read this one. I would be interested in reading more though. And I mean, for starters, just this cover is just so gripping. I love it. Our main character is Lydia Strong, and as a child her mother was murdered, and she was the one who put the FBI on the trail of the killer. Years later she's now this she's obsessed with true crime. She's obsessed with getting justice for victims, and she's actually a consultant who works with the FBI sometimes. And in this case, there are 3 girls who go missing that are kind of overlooked by society, and she gets involved in their case. Definitely like a very crime fiction heavy thriller. Really, really good. I really enjoyed this. I thought Lydia was an amazing character. I would definitely be interested in continuing this series, and wow, it's just one of those hard-hitting books you read, so I would really recommend checking this series out. One that I just finished, and I recommend this, but I want to preface that this is probably one of 2 of the darkest books on this list. It is an exceptionally dark thriller. I almost didn't make it through it, if I'm being honest. Now, I don't typically read horror, and I don't think this qualifies as horror, but this is definitely very graphic. So please keep that in mind. I mean, I would recommend maybe looking up trigger warnings in general, but this one was particularly difficult to read. This is called Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier. Wow. So she held nothing back. The author held absolutely nothing back in this book. This is one of the most brutal books I have read in my entire life, and it had a phenomenal ending, a phenomenal twist. It was a great story. I would just recommend making sure you're in a good mental state going into this book, because it is a very, very rough book. So our main character in this is Georgiana, or Gio as her friends call her, and in high school one of her best friends, Angela Wong, disappeared, never to be seen from again, and Gio's boyfriend at the time, Calvin, was found out to be a serial killer, and he was the one who was suspected of murdering Angela. He's put on trial. So you're kind of starting this book from the ending, in a sense. You're starting this book actually with the trial where she is helping to put Calvin behind bars. Now, the police view him as a serial killer. He is a serial killer. But to Geo, he was also her first love. And so you're kind of reading snippets from her past where you're seeing how she is just kind of manipulated and just obsessed with Calvin and what kind of is going on and leading up to the night of Angela's murder, and what she's held back from police all these years. Then you're also reading her perspective as she herself is in prison because she was considered, you know, she kind of hid some evidence from the police basically. So you're reading some prison scenes, which I think, wow. I think the prison scenes for me at least were the hardest to read. I felt it really makes you feel extremely claustrophobic, which is what I imagine that's a very accurate feeling, having not been in prison myself, but I imagine that would be a very accurate feeling, and it's a rough one. But at the same time, similar murders start to happen years later after Geo gets out of jail. So is it Calvin back? What is going on? You're trying to figure that out. You do get to read some multiple perspectives and timelines in this, and like I said, this is the darkest thing I think one of the darkest things I've ever read in my life. It is extremely brutal. There were times I had to put this book down and like give myself a breather for a few hours before picking it up, even though I really wanted to keep reading, but I just needed like a mental moment because it was just like, okay, wow. So other than that though, the book was phenomenal. I love Jennifer Hillier's writing. I've read several of her books. This is the only one I can think of that has a serial killer specific plotline that I've read, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like I said, absolutely brutal. Doesn't hold anything back, but I really did enjoy this. If you're looking for a very dark serial killer thriller, this one will make you think. It will really make you think. For something less graphic but still extremely suspenseful, I recommend the classic And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. I love this, and even if you're someone who's watching this and you're like, I'm not really a classic reader, this book really is much more fast-paced, I find, than typical classics. I've read a lot of other Agatha Christie, I've really enjoyed those, but this one definitely stands out as more of a thriller suggestion than a mystery. It's really quick-paced. Basically, we have 10 strangers, they're all invited to this island under different pretenses, and they arrive to discover these pretenses were false. They don't know why they're all there, and they start to die one by one. They start to be murdered one by one. So it appears one of them is a serial killer because no one else appears to be on the island. And yeah, if you haven't watched this or read this book, I loved the BBC mystery series. I thought it was phenomenal. I would love to watch a movie version of this as well, but this was just fantastic. Really great classic if you are just getting into classics, or you're kind of, maybe you don't feel like they're for you, but you're looking for something that is like a classic thriller. People are dying one by one. You are on the edge of your seat trying to figure out what happened. I mean, if you can put this together, props to you, because it's an amazing ending. One that I just finished this month and really enjoyed was The Lake of Lost Girls by Katherine Greene. Wow. If you're looking for like a summary serial killer situation, this is it. Check this one out from my library. This one will really put you through it. So this one involves mixed media. You're reading multiple media perspectives. You're reading a podcast, some social media, and then traditional writing. And you're also reading from multiple timelines and points of views. So we have two sisters that this basically centers around. We have Jessica. We're reading her perspective in 1998. She is a college student, and female students at that university are going missing. And she's also going through a lot in her life, and that's what you're reading about. And she also vanishes. About 24 years later, you're reading from her sister's perspective, Lindsay. Lindsay was her younger sister at the time. She was the last one to really see Jessica. She doesn't know what happened to her. She just kind of vanished off the face of the earth, it seems. No body ever found. And now years later, a true crime podcast is starting to stir things up, and bodies of some of those female students are being found in a nearby lake. And Lindsay is now finally going to put pieces together and figure out what happened to her sister and these other students. I loved this. I flew through this. All the multimedia, mixed media components really make this a fast read. Very entertaining, very interesting. I put together parts of it. Other parts of it completely shocked me. I still don't know how I feel about the ending entirely, but it definitely threw me for a loop, and it's just a really compelling story. I loved reading both timelines of both sisters. I found both perspectives very interesting, so definitely one that I would consider a must-read. What Never Happened by Rachel Howzell Hall. Now, I'm going to warn you, this is definitely a very slow burn thriller. Definitely a chunkier read. However, the payoff for this, phenomenal. I loved this. I thought this was so good. Still, I think my favorite Rachel Howzell haul for sure. Our main character in this is Colette, also known as Coco, and she is returning to this island. So we have an isolation setting here, which I love. She's returning to her home island after all of these years to her family home. She was the only survivor of a deadly home invasion as a child, and her aunt is now living in the family home. She's like the only relative Coco really has. They have a very tense relationship, and wow, a lot of things explored there. A whole lot going on. Well, Coco, while she's there, decides to kind of connect with an old friend who helps her get a job as an obituary writer. This book, wow. This book literally starts off with our main character's obituary. That is the opening part of this book. Because someone starts to send her threats throughout the book that are like her own obituary, which is horrifying, so horrifying. But she starts to write these obituaries, and she starts to pick up on a trend in town of these missing or murdered elderly women. And no one really thinks much of it at first because they are elderly women, so it's, you know, it's assumed that they kind of wandered off. They died of natural causes, and people kind of overlook them. But she puts together a pattern, and she starts to think that there is a serial killer on the island. This book has so many layers to it, between what Coco is personally going through in her life, her family, what happened to her family all those years ago. She's trying to figure that out. What's happening on the island now with this like possible serial killer on the loose. And the ending for this, I just sat there and was like, wow. Wow, wow, wow. Rachel Howzell Hall, this was my favorite by her. I really recommend it. I need to read more by this author, but this one really knocked my socks off. Definitely slow burn, but the payoff is there. A Flicker in the Dark by Stacy Willingham. Oh, this is my favorite by this author, and this is, I think, her most well-known book for very good reason. Read this year, and it's phenomenal. So our main character in this is Chloe Davis, and when she was 12, 6 teenage girls disappeared from her small town, and by the end of that summer, her father confessed to their murders and was put behind bars forever. That alone grips me. It's now 20 years later, so she's 32, she is engaged, she's holding on, trying desperately to live like a happy life. She's a psychologist, which I find to be a really interesting component. And then similar murders start to happen again. And you're wondering, is she being paranoid, or is she seeing parallels to the past that aren't there? Or is Chloe going to unmask a killer for the second time in her life? You're reading multiple timelines from this. You get to read some snippets from the past, you get to read at the present. This was so gripping. I really couldn't put this down. I was able to piece it together just barely, but that didn't take away from the impact of the ending. I loved this one. A really great small town serial killer in the South, Louisiana, crazy family dynamics. I loved this. The Quiet Tenant by Clemence Michallon. This is a very unique thriller because you have the victim of this serial killer, so she's still alive, she is with him, but he ends up having to move, and he's got a teenage daughter living with him, so he has to move the victim with him, but somehow introduce her to the daughter, and then make an excuse as to why this woman is coming with them, which is obviously kind of a weird situation. And basically the story, what I liked about it is that you are reading the serial killer thriller from the perspectives of 3 women who are closest to him. The victim-to-be, the woman he's kidnapped, who he's currently holding, his girlfriend, which I don't even, like, you don't even want to think about that. That is so weird. And then his daughter, who's, I think, about 16 years old. And this is such an interesting take on a serial killer thriller, because usually you're trying to hunt down the serial killer. That's like one of the plot points, right, in a typical serial killer thriller, but this one, you know from the start exactly who the serial killer is. In fact, you know a whole lot about him because you're reading from the people closest to him in his life, but you're on the edge of your seat because you're watching this woman and you're trying to root for her, and you're like, get out of there, get out of there. You're trying to root for her to get out of there somehow, and it is just so suspenseful, and the writing was phenomenal. I cannot wait. I have the second book by this author on hold at my library, and I'm just waiting to get my hands on it, and I can't wait to read it. I Did It For You by Amy Engel. I read this around Valentine's Day this year because this cover screamed Valentine's Day to me. This book deeply explores grief and loss. You're reading from Greer's perspective, and her sister was murdered when they were teenagers. It's in a small Kansas hometown, and Greer's sister Liza was murdered, and her family's never been the same. Naturally. Many years later, there are now similar killings happening in the same small town, and Greer is convinced that the person they put away for her sister's murderer had an accomplice, or help or something, and they are now committing this string of murders. So you're going back to the small town with her, and she's got to make some unlikely allies to try to figure this out. Definitely, again, more of a slow burn kind of mystery thriller situation, but you'll be on the edge of your seat. This one really got me and hit me hard in all the right ways, and it really does explore grief and loss in very interesting ways. There was a lot of character development in this one, and I really enjoyed it. A very quick read as well. This one's about 270 something pages, and I just flew through this. I really enjoyed this. The small Kansas hometown like setting was very good. Going back to her family's home after all these years and seeing what's kind of become of her family. Very interesting. Cold to the Touch by Kerri Hakoda. If you're looking for more of a detective serial killer type thriller, this one is it. Our main character is Detective Beans, that's his nickname, and he is called in for a murder of a young woman and who he recognizes as his barista. This takes place in a very small Alaskan town, so everyone kind of knows each other. It is extremely cold, and unfortunately, between the elements and the animals, a lot of the evidence on this young woman has been destroyed. And he starts to realize that there is a serial killer on the loose, and they are not just a serial killer, they are like a speed killer. They are just, I mean, they are going very quickly. So there is a huge amount of like thrilling, suspenseful elements in this because this person is killing at a rapid rate and the police are trying their best to catch up and to catch this person before another person is murdered. There's also this interesting relationship where he has to help. There's this interesting relationship with Detective Beans where he has to ask his ex for help because she's an expert in the area, and they have to kind of work together. So there's some interesting subplots there that I think added some more character depth to the story, because one of my main issues sometimes with detective mysteries or thrillers is that you don't really get to know the detective character. Sometimes they're a little like standoffish as a character, like kind of one note. That's not the case with Detective Beans. You really get to know him more, which I liked. And I loved the Alaskan setting, and the ending for this was so suspenseful and high stakes, and you're just holding your breath. And I loved this, and I feel like I don't hear anyone talk about this book, and I don't know why. It's really good. I would really recommend it, especially for winter. I think this next author is so slept on, and that is Loreth Ann White. And the one I'm specifically recommending for this video is The Patient's Secret. I love it. That title alone gives me chills. I want to know what's going on. One of our main characters in this is Lily, and she is a renowned psychologist. She takes patients in her home. She's got kind of a special office built there. And there is this person known as the Jogger Killer, kind of running amok in this nice neighborhood, killing women who are on jogs in the morning. And these women are continually found. The detective on the case is convinced they are linked. And Lily herself has some secrets, including some secrets within her family and her kids. Her husband, a very distinguished professor in the area. You also are reading another point of view from this woman named Arwen. And she is this very free-spirited, sensual woman. She is single. She has a 16-year-old son. And they drive into town and they disrupt Story Cove. Story Cove is this very kind of upright, you know, uptight community. It's very like proper, and she really ruffles some feathers because she doesn't fit the mold. Then you're reading from Detective Ruth's perspective, who is very shrewd at her job. She is good at what she does. She wants to unmask this jogger killer, but she's also got some secrets of her own that she's very good at keeping. This was so layered. Loreth Ann White in general, if you like thrillers, please check her out, but this one is a fantastic serial killer focused one I would really recommend looking into. Sleep Tight by J.H. Markert. Now, if you listen to me talk about Jar of Hearts, this is the other one I was referring to. These are about, I would say Jar of Hearts is even more brutal, but this one is definitely very grisly, very gritty, very in your face, very graphic. But it was something I couldn't put down last year. I really, really enjoyed it. And this is described as having old school horror flair, which I would agree. Out of everything, this one probably leans the most into horror. I was still able to get through it as someone who doesn't typically read horror, but it definitely was pushing my limits with how graphic it is. So keep that in mind if you've watched other videos, if you have a sense of what I like. Keep that in mind. But this one involves a serial killer named Father Silence, who had a long list of victims, unfortunately, that were found in this really creepy home. Now, honestly, I would skip reading the synopsis for this one because I feel like it gives away some fun twists and turns. I didn't know the full synopsis going in. I enjoyed it more that way, so I would skip the full synopsis. What you want to know about this is that it's about a serial killer named Father Silence. He has this house of horrors. There were 19 different victims found there, and police, grabbed him. They finally put him away. He had one sole survivor, and 2 decades later, he is put to death. So people think, you know, his rampage is over. However, within the next day, another murder has happened, and there is a kind of copycat killer on the loose who's called themselves the Outcast. And we actually have the original detective's daughter, Tess, who is on the case now. And she had something to do with the original case as well. I don't think you need to know anything else. Don't read the synopsis. I feel like it gives away a few things. I mean, still fantastic thriller either way, but this one was really dark, really intense, definitely involves some things with kids, so please keep that in mind. But I did think this was a fantastic mystery. I really couldn't put it down. I feel like Tess herself was a very layered, emotionally driven character who I really liked. You get to see a good insight. You get to see some really good insights into her family life and what drives her, and I really like that. Again, if I'm reading a detective's perspective in a book, I like to really see them on a more personal level, and this book really does that well. And last but not least, we actually have a second book from Lisa Unger who I really enjoy. This one is called Christmas Presents. You can read it any time of year, but I did read it around Christmas, and I have to say it was pretty fun because there's actually some really cozy bookstore scenes in this, which is kind of a funny juxtaposition to the rest of the book. Our main character in this is Madeline Martin, and despite a very tough childhood because of a killer, she has built a good life for herself. She has a cozy bookshop. She's taking care of her father, who was a detective on the original case and is unfortunately too ill to take care of himself anymore. It's approaching Christmas, and this true crime podcaster, who's very well known for like digging deep and solving things that people have really buried over the years, comes into her bookstore and starts to bring up things from her past. Basically, she helped to put a man behind bars who killed one of her best friends. There were also two sisters who disappeared around the same time, like in her high school class, who were never seen again. Despite having this person behind bars that Madeline helped to put behind bars, there has been a rash of other girls going missing in kind of a similar way. So he really wants her help uncovering anything she might be able to remember at that time. Really great. I love Lisa Unger's writing. I feel like she just gets to the heart of the story so well. She puts a lot of heart into it even when it's a brutal story, and I love that about her writing. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know, what are your favorite thrillers that feature serial killers? I always really enjoy these because I find it so interesting, the psychology and motives for what drive people to become serial killers, because I can't even fathom that mentality myself, which is probably a good thing, but I do really enjoy this as fiction, and I would love any recommendations you guys have. If you are new to my channel, I hope you'll hit subscribe. I do post new thriller content and other book content in the mystery genre, anything from cozy to thrillers on my channel, and I would love it if you'd hit subscribe and hang around. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!